Welcome back, everybody, to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast dedicated to amicable divorces. I'm Judy Weigel, your host and amicable divorce expert. Why? Because that's all I do, amicable divorces. As a divorce mediator and legal document assistant filing for amicable divorces in Los Angeles, California. So today I wanted to talk about something that every single one of us has to deal with, and deal with in a way that allows us to be normal and function and not lose it in life, and that is control. Establishing control and removing fear in divorce is really important, because just in life, in general, we need to feel like we're in control to be happy, to be sane, to be able to get up every day and deal with the challenges that life brings us. But then as we grow older, we realize we really don't have control. At least we don't have control over events that happen to us and circumstances. Yes, we have control over good decision making that will more than likely create a good circumstance. But we really don't have full control over anything except one thing. We have control over our reaction to events, and we have control over how we communicate and express ourselves. And that is the secret, though. If we control the way we communicate, if we control the way we react to life, then we're doing about the best we can. So now we're going to go from normal life and having to feel in control to divorce. Divorce is the occurrence in our lives that makes everything seem out of control. Even if you're the one asking for the divorce, you have no idea how your spouse is going to react and the events that are going to transpire. But even more so, if we were asked for the divorce, we feel completely out of control. So what I wanted to do in today's episode is identify those areas that we need to feel control in. And then I want to give you remedies for control. I do like to keep these podcasts to around 30 minutes. And so if I'm only halfway through the list, I will do a second episode, a follow-up to this as the next episode. But let me just list for you the areas of control, or where we want to have control, and then I'm going to circle back and we're going to flesh them out even more. So those areas are control of communication, control over decision making, control over money, control over your lawyer or your spouse's lawyer if you have to go full legal representation, and then control of the legal system. If anybody's been to court, you know that's a foreign land. Control over your emotions, that's huge. Control over the outcome of the settlement. Oh, this is the biggest of all. Control over custody and the co-parenting plan. And control over fear. And let me just make another statement about control. Until we feel that we're in control, our lives will be driven by fear. And when we're in fear mode, we make horrible decisions. And so that's going to be my goal. I want you to operate with as little fear as possible, because you're going to need to be calm and focused in the divorce. You're going to need to be able to communicate properly. And that's the only way you're going to get through the divorce. So I want to help you in those areas. Let's talk about control over communication, because that's where you have ultimate control. The way we talk to each other makes all the difference in the world in divorce settlement discussions. But communication with somebody who hurt you and who you feel trampled on your trust is darn near impossible until we learn that communicating, and here's the key, learning to communicate without blame is the only way to get through the divorce with a feeling of calm and with establishing emotional control. You're not going to change the essence of the other person simply by using a conciliatory tone of voice when communicating throughout the divorce process, but you're going to make it as good as it possibly can be. Now, how do we get blame out? Well, I did do another podcast when I was reading episodes from the Good Karma Divorce. There was an episode about removing blame. So here's how you remove blame. You first of all have to understand that Maya Angelou quote, "When you know better, you do better." And sometimes we just don't know any better, and we don't do our best. But if you look at life as a learning lesson, and this is the only way I've been able to deal with life and not feel that it's stacked against me, because life can feel seriously unfair. But if we reposition it and reframe the goal and purpose of life on earth is to teach us things, to advance us, then we can look at the divorce as a learning lesson to see how to make better choices if we want to get married again, to look at our behavior, to see what we can do to be better people, and simply to understand the other person. Maybe we never saw it coming. Maybe we truly were blindsided, which really is less an issue than kind of knowing something's wrong but not doing anything about it. If we can actually turn around and not blame our spouse when we've been blindsided, we have truly risen to another level of consciousness, and that would bode very well for us in the rest of our lives. So if we can accept that everything in life happens to us to teach us lessons, if we can stop resisting traumatic events and stop saying that we're the victims of events, and just address these things that happen to us so that we can learn, we can advance, and we can respond in a straight ahead, pleasant voice, soft, calming, non-critical, non-judgmental, we will be exercising control over the outcome of the settlement or out of the ongoing co-parenting relationship. So 2 things happen in divorce. If you have children, you need to deal with all of the decisions around the settlement. But then you have the extra issue of you've got to be talking to your then ex-spouse for as long as the children are minors. And so it really is imperative that people with children learn how to communicate with each other. And as long as one of you communicates well, believe me, it will eventually change your spouse. It'll change something. Well, most people. Now, if you're really dealing with somebody who has serious mental health challenges, do the best you can. At least when you're communicating in a conciliatory manner, but firm. I'm not saying cave. I'm just saying the tone of voice has to be not snarky, not judgmental, and not with attitude. That's what I mean. At least you will feel better over how you handled yourselves. Listen, it takes a lot. It takes a huge effort. It takes a long time to remove the hurt and the anger that you might be feeling as you're going through divorce. If you were just presented with divorce, it's not easy. You're not going to do this overnight. But when these emotions can be removed from our tone and our words, you will more than likely get to the settlement that works for you. Communication is king. Must be addressed. Let's go to control of decision making. Well, maybe decision making wasn't your strong suit while you were married. Maybe that was your spouse's role. but now you have to decide for yourself. That in and of itself can be very fearful. Why? Because you're going to change who you are. You're going to be a different person when you're starting to make decisions for yourself. You're not going to allow your spouse to take over for you. And so you're going to have to get used to that. Fears. What if you make the wrong decisions? Great that you can make your own decisions now, but do you have the confidence in making them? Or the fear in making them? Is that controlling you? So if that's the case, and you really don't know what's right or wrong, listen to your gut, listen to your heart, and get knowledge of the law. So that's really important, getting knowledge of the law. So now let's go into the remedy for control of decision making, especially if that's the most fearful thing, one of the most fearful things you're facing. First and foremost, get legal counsel. I know people are afraid of attorneys, but we need them because only attorneys can give us legal advice. Now, getting with the right attorney is the issue, and we'll deal with that when we talk about control of attorneys. But get legal counsel. Go on Google. I mean, everything about the law is on Google as well. Learn the law, then look at how the law underscores what you feel and think is right for you. Questions. Does the law reflect the hopes and dreams of the marriage? Let me give you an example. And this is fairly common. In a fairly long-term marriage, maybe of around 10 years or so, if both spouses have retirement accounts and they want to do something like refurbish the house, buy a house, quite often one person's retirement account will be depleted in order to make those improvements in our lives. And we're looking at the other person's retirement to get by, or maybe our spouse has an inheritance that's going to come through and we're looking at that. Well, in California, inheritance is separate property. Quite a well-known fact. So what do? Now you're getting divorced and all of a sudden the inheritance is separate property. There's only one retirement account and we need to make some decisions. So that would be a very interesting conversation to have about asking for compensation in another area because you used your retirement account. Maybe it'll fly, maybe it won't. I mean, maybe it'll just get reduced to, no, we're going to go according to the law. But at least you felt confident approaching the subject. And maybe if you approach the subject, you can find compensation in another way. But you want to make decisions with confidence, with knowledge of the law. You can ask for the law to be set aside, and the decisions reflect the goals of the marriage. I mean, I've worked on a lot of settlement agreements that moved the law aside because the people were conciliatory. They weren't blaming each other. And I'm telling you, that is at the heart. If you cannot blame, not be judgmental, know the law, really look at what you feel is right for you and right for the marriage, right for both of you to walk away respectfully, you're doing a wonderful job in decision making. And if you're doing it without putting guilt on the other person, then you need many gold stars because that's really, really hard to do. Okay, next, control over money. Huge. Money is at the heart of a divorce settlement. You have legal fees, or at least, people who come to see me spend money on my fees. I'm not a lawyer, but I still charge money to file. And then there's mediation fees. Not everybody mediates. A lot of people come to decisions on their own. But you may need mediation in order to have a third person help you creatively put a settlement package together. So it all falls under the realm of legal fees. Then you have spousal and child support. You're unsettled until that's established, if those are two components of your divorce settlement. And then you have daily living expenses. So what if you weren't working? What if you were the one that made a lot less? And even if you're the person who made more, you're going to be living on less if there's child support and spousal support as part of the divorce, or at least living on less if there were two incomes that contributed to the household. Now there's only going to be one. So control over money is huge. And what is divorce but the financial breaking of a contract? So when we get married, the reason why we go to City Hall is, in the eyes of any state, we are establishing a financial contract with each other. That's certainly not what's on our minds when we go to get our marriage license, is it? We're emotional, we're in love. If we have a prenup, okay, so that laid some guidelines down for how our financial future was going to be executed. But still there's fear, even with a prenup. And people have prenups that were done correctly, and they come into my office, and they're still concerned because until it's all laid on paper in a divorce settlement agreement, then we're not settled, and we don't feel that we have ultimate control, and of course we have fear. So let me go through some remedies here. For child and spousal support, what's the first thing we do? We get legal advice, we get legal information, and we do what's required for us to do so that someone can run numbers for child and spousal support for us. If we can get that done quickly, we're in better shape than we think. That's one thing accomplished. That would be two revenue streams if you're the recipient. And if you're the provider, you still want to know. You want to know what's left for you to live on. So in the state of California, the way we get to child and spousal support initially is we run this software program called the DissoMaster. Well, we can only run the DissoMaster when the financial disclosure forms are provided to us. And that's where people drag their feet a lot. We file the petition, we get a case number, we serve the respondent, maybe we file a response for the respondent, and then the next steps are the disclosure forms. And that's where everything comes to a grinding halt. And what happens if we don't do the disclosure forms? We start arguing. We don't really know what amount of money is right. Some people think that the higher wage earner is supposed to pay every single one of the lower wage earner's bills and do child and spousal support. You definitely need legal advice on this. If that's what you think, you need legal advice. So the sooner you can move through the paperwork, at least the financial disclosures, so that child and spousal support can be established, you're taking a huge worry off the table, and you've put a control to those two revenue streams. Legal fees. How do we control legal fees? Well, you have to use attorneys for legal advice. There's no question about it. But then, if you have to go attorney representation, here's where you're going to control money. Do you realize that every email you send to your attorney, every phone message you leave, every phone call you make and engage in conversation, you're being charged for every single minute? You're being charged for not only reading for your attorney to read the emails, but to write the emails. You're being charged for your attorney to listen to your voicemail and to respond. Limit it. And don't tell your story ad infinitum to your attorney. Your attorney can't do anything with the emotional component of the divorce. And attorneys are interesting people because I think most attorneys, especially those who litigate, love to fight. And when you keep telling your story, you're feeding that desire to fight unconsciously. You need therapists for the emotional component. You don't need attorneys. Now, you need your attorneys to know if there's been any physical abuse. Your attorney certainly needs to know that. Or if there's any undue emotional, verbal abuse in communication, your attorney needs to do that because there are legal ways to stop that. But just to unload and use your attorney as a sounding board, do not do that. That is a waste of your money. Go to a therapist. Therapists are really important, and they charge a lot less than attorneys on an hourly rate. So you're going to save money that way, yet you're going to get your emotions handled. When we get to legal, how to control your attorney, we're going to talk about how to control filings because they can get out of control. And I'm going to tell you a very interesting story that I overheard with two attorneys talking about literally creating filings that were unnecessary just because the money was there to do it. And it unfortunately happens. Also, read the billing statements. If you're going full attorney representation and you give them a retainer, it's not the only amount of money you're going to pay. You're going to keep paying more retainers, and your attorney is going to use the retainer with each phone call, each email, each meeting, each time in court. And you're going to get billing statements every month. Read those billing statements. Just don't put them aside because you're going to see what it's costing you to be in this relationship. And if you can't afford this relationship, get out of it sooner rather than later. If you can't afford it, you still want to know where your money is going. And then the daily living expenses. So again, legal advice. Legal advice is going to tell you what the higher wage earning spouse is obligated for and not obligated for. Just because they're not obligated to pay every single expense you have doesn't mean they won't pay more than they should. If you really look at the marriage and what transpired in the marriage that led to the divorce, sometimes the higher wage earning spouse feels so badly if it's their fault that they will accommodate with more money than they are legally required to do. But I'm going to go back to the communication part again. You need to communicate in a conciliatory way, friendly, firm, without blame, without judgment, without attitude. You will get more in everything that you can possibly get if you're just decent about the way you communicate. Now let's go to control of your lawyer. First of all, lawyers pose fear. Lawyers, just the idea that lawyers are involved is a very fearful thing. Having to call a lawyer, having to talk to a lawyer, having to deal with a lawyer, having to pay a lawyer. Because unless you've used lawyers for something like a divorce or personal injury, you really have to get used to the whole vibe. And it's a hard vibe to get used to. So with your lawyer, here's where you need to exercise control. Or by the way, your spouse's attorney. That's harder yet. But your spouse's attorney is going to be right there too in this equation. So control. To know when your lawyer is filing things that aren't necessary. Okay, this is huge. There are really good attorneys that will not take advantage of you, that will not file frivolously just to create more billing. And there are attorneys who will. Unfortunately, that's life. There are attorneys who will. So let me tell you a very quick story. I belong to several bar associations. And I was at an evening seminar a few years ago, and I was sitting at a table with many people, and there were two attorneys next to me. I didn't know who they were. They weren't in the same firm, but one of the attorneys said to the other attorney, "I just got a really great case today." "Oh yeah? Tell me about it," the other attorney said. "Well, I already talked to opposing counsel, and opposing counsel said, 'Get ready, I'm going to paper you to death, but the money is there.'" And then there was silence. And I wanted to see how this one attorney was going to respond. And she didn't. And I said, well, what did you say? I said, I'm sorry, I don't know you, but I'm listening to you. And I find that very interesting. So what did you say to opposing counsel when he said, I'm going to paper you to death? Okay, that's translated to mean I'm going to do a ton of filings. I'm going to rack up a huge amount of money. And I assumed that more than likely opposing counsel's client was going to pay for the attorney who was doing the talking at this table. So she was going to make a lot of money. I think she was representing the wife. The opposing counsel was representing the husband. So I said, well, what did you say? And she said, well, what should I have said? I said, what you should have said was, it's wrong. You can't just make frivolous filings. You can't just file and file and file and take up the court's time just so we can make money. This is why people like me, legal document assistants, exist now, because people were being taken advantage of. The court was being taken advantage of because now court time is being used unnecessarily when attorneys could sit down and talk about this on their own. They don't need to take the court's time with that. The court's time needs to be taken up with things that only the court can decide on. The court's time does not need to be taken up by wealthy people who have the money to file that just are going to get delight out of annoying the other person, hurting the other person, creating fear in the other person. That's not allowed. There are attorney codes of ethics that don't allow this. And so I said, but this is why people don't like attorneys. This is why I have a job as a legal document assistant. You should have said no. Money isn't worth it. We have high moral character that we need to support. Okay, don't laugh when I say that. We have ethics that we're supposed to adhere to. And when you're in a position of working with somebody and you know more than they do, and your clients are relying on you to do the ethical right thing and you don't, woe to you. It's a horrible thing to do to people. Okay. So what is the other thing? So you want to be in control, that your lawyer isn't setting you up for unrealistic expectations. That's the other thing. In order to get your business, some lawyers can tell you that they can do things that ultimately they can't do. They can't get for you. It would be ridiculous, but you don't know any differently. And so I say, before you sign on the dotted line, interview a few attorneys and really compare how the attorneys talk. And you're going to see differences. And you're going to see how you actually feel about the attorneys. And you need to choose an attorney that feels right to you. Your gut's going to give you a good indication of what you feel is right. You want to be in control that you have chosen a good and knowledgeable attorney. So here's what I would do. If this is your first divorce, I would not only interview about 3 attorneys, I would go online. I would go on Google and I would start learning the law and ask questions based on what you've read. Then you'll know if you have a good attorney or not. You want to control that you chose an attorney who understands what you want, even if it's less than what you could receive under your state's laws. Now, this is interesting because I work in the world of amicable divorces and I mediate. So I'm used to writing settlement agreements that are a little different than community property, equal division. And I'm very sensitive to doing exactly what my clients want me to write. As long as they're convinced that this is the right decision for them and they've gotten legal knowledge, legal advice, legal information, let them make the decisions they want. But there are some attorneys that just want to fight for what they want for you. But also bear in mind, and I'm going to give the attorneys a few points here. Attorneys want to make sure that they have given you the law adequately and accurately, and that you really understand it so that you don't come back to them later and want to do a malpractice suit. So they're very much interested in providing to you all the information you need, but they want to make sure you understand it as well. So allow your attorney to say, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Because a good attorney will want to make sure you're sure. But then say, no, I am sure. You may want to explain why you're settling for something different, just so your attorney knows you thought this through. But don't go for something you don't want. Make this the divorce settlement that's right for you. So you're paying your lawyer for legal information, to know how to file for you, to know how to negotiate for you. But you're not paying him to make decisions that don't reflect you. Explain your needs and desires to your attorney, and read his or her contract thoroughly so that you understand the charges and you understand what to expect in the service being provided. Research lawyers. Ask the lawyers under consideration how they work. How heavy their caseload is. How quickly they return emails and phone calls. This is so important because one of the worst things in a divorce is timing and emotion. And when you need to know something, when you need to explain to your attorney that something has transpired, it needs to be talked about now. And if your attorney has a huge caseload, which so many do, they're not able to get back to you same day or next day. And that can seriously impact and cause a negative result. I spoke to a woman recently who is already divorced, but this happened to her. She and her husband, they owned a business and there were some complicated assets. So they both hired attorneys, but they were both on speaking terms. And the husband wanted to talk with the wife and just say, look, let's just make this settlement the way we want it to be. He was feeling generous, but she was so convinced by her attorney to not speak to her husband without the attorney being part of it or without the attorney giving consent. And so she waited. The wife waited for the attorney to get back to her. And the attorney, I don't know, was in trial, wasn't getting back to her. And the husband misread the reason why the wife wasn't getting back to him. And the wife didn't explain she was waiting for her attorney. She was afraid. The attorney put so much fear in her that she shouldn't talk to her husband, that she didn't even tell her husband that she wanted her attorney's consent. So her husband got so angry and the whole divorce turned ugly because he was so hurt that he was rebuffed. And this is how attorneys can hurt you without understanding that their response time is crucial to the emotional stability of the couple. And it really is. So if you really do your research with attorneys, you'll learn soon enough if you're in a good lawyer relationship. And you don't have to completely know the law to know if your attorney is doing the right thing. You can feel it. You'll know. But interviewing several attorneys will really make you know that you've hired the right one more than likely. Now, this is number 5, and I'm going to finish with this in today's podcast, and then I'm going to follow up next week with part 2 of control and removing fear, because we have a few more to go. So this is about control of the legal system. This is how we're going to finish today. Okay, so nobody controls the legal system. I mean, the legal system is what it is. This is a completely new world that is foreign. It's to you. It's adversarial. It's with legal professionals who speak a language with words that you never thought you would use. And appearing in front of a judge, you give up control, but sometimes it's necessary to get decisions made. And then there's opposing counsel that may force your attorney to respond to frivolous filings. So where do you exercise control within the legal system? Well, you can't change it. But you can ask why things have to be done so that you can understand and have knowledge of how everything works and make it work in your best interest. You have to sit on your attorney if he or she is allowing frivolous filings. And gosh, once you hire an attorney, you can't talk to another attorney. But you can ask your attorney when it looks like it's getting just too heavy with motions and compelling and dispositions and subpoenas and this and that. Just sit with your attorney and say, how do we reduce this to the most basic way of moving forward? Ask your attorney in a non-adversarial divorce what would be standard and typical. And then ask your attorney what the different levels of adversarial filings are. If you can avoid going to court and sit in a mediation, you can control the outcome better than if you go into court. Mediation is actually one of the most wonderful tools you have. But if you can't use mediation, try not to make it the biggest food fight known to mankind. Don't nitpick everything that you want to bring up that would hurt the other person. And don't expect the judge to make emotional decisions. The level of expectation of what the judge can and can't do needs to be made very clear to you. I've heard way too many people say, I can't imagine a judge would allow this kind of thing to happen. I mean, really? Well, really. So let's learn. You have to learn how a judge has to rule. So a judge is provided with what are called benchmarks. And it's a range of ruling on every issue that would happen or that would be part of a family law settlement. And you need maybe have your attorney read to you from the benchmarks. You know, I've never suggested that to anybody before. Maybe have an attorney read to you from the benchmarks. Just say, if we have to go to court, I want to know what the possible decisions could be. So that's how you're at least controlling your level of expectation. And that removes fear. Knowing what the possible choices could be, at least you can get yourself ready. So have your attorney read to you from the benchmarks of whatever the issues are going to be in court and see where the rulings can go. And then you're ready. And then you're ready to know where you want to settle. You know, if you're still allowed to have some kind of input in settling. And the last thing I want to say in terms of a remedy for controlling the legal system is relax. Just relax. You can't make the system change, but you can ask why things have to be done so that you can understand and have knowledge of how everything works, and that can work in your best interest. So this will be the end of today's podcast, and the next episode we're going to finish with the other 5 issues in establishing control so that you can remove fear. But to recap, we discussed today control of communication, control of decision making, control of money, control of your lawyer, and control of the legal system. So thank you very much for listening to this episode of Constructive Uncoupling. I'm Judy Weigel. My company is Divorce Resource Incorporated in Los Angeles. I'm a divorce mediator and a legal document assistant working in the field of amicable divorces. If you would like to ask me any questions, if you would like to ask me to present content on a topic that you haven't heard yet, you can reach me at my email address, Judy, Judy, at divorceresourceinc.com. Judy, Judy, at divorceresourceinc.com. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.